The Harmony's Edge docking bay hummed with the precise crystalline architecture that defined Yavari engineering. Captain Rhys Calder stepped off the human transport, his boots echoing against floors that seemed to absorb and redirect sound in ways that made his teeth itch. Everything here was designed for serenity, curved walls that flowed like water, bioluminescent panels that pulsed in rhythm with some alien heartbeat, air that tasted of ozone and flowering vines. It made him want to punch something. Captain Calder. The voice belonged to Ambassador Caney, the human diplomatic envoy who'd briefed him during transit. Remember, the Yavari value emotional restraint above all else. They find our enthusiasm disturbing. Rhys straightened his uniform jacket, the fabric stiff with military precision. At 34, he'd served in 3 colonial conflicts and pacified 2 mining rebellions. His hands were scarred from real combat, not diplomatic handshakes. I'll keep that in mind, sir. The receiving committee awaited them in the central atrium, 7 Yavari standing in perfect formation. They were tall, elegant beings with silver blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. Their faces were angular, almost ethereal, with large, dark eyes that missed nothing. They wore flowing robes that probably cost more than Rhys's annual salary. At the center stood their delegation leader, a female whose bearing commanded immediate attention. Her dark hair was woven with threads of precious metal, and when she looked at him, Rhys felt like a specimen under a microscope. "I am Yavari of the 3rd Diplomatic Caste," she said, her voice carrying the musical cadence typical of her species. "We welcome you to the Harmony's Edge, Captain Calder." Rhys stepped forward, offering what he hoped was an appropriately restrained bow. "The honor is mine, Yavari. I look forward to working with—" A sharp crack echoed through the atrium as Lieutenant Torres, fresh out of the academy, stumbled while carrying equipment. The sound reverberated like a gunshot in the carefully modulated space. 2 Yavari security officers immediately moved toward the young human, their movements fluid but unmistakably threatening. Rhys was between them and Torres before conscious thought could intervene. His body shifted into combat stance, feet planted, shoulders squared, every muscle coiled for violence. The change was instantaneous and absolute. "Stand down," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded troops under fire. "He's under my protection." The Yavari officers froze, clearly taken aback by the sudden transformation. The human who'd been politely bowing moments before had become something else entirely, something dangerous. Yavari's large eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She raised a graceful hand, and her security officers stepped back with fluid precision. "There was no threat intended, Captain," she said, studying him with newfound intensity. "We merely sought to assist." Rhys held his position for another heartbeat, scanning for additional threats that existed only in his combat-trained mind. Then, gradually, he forced his muscles to relax. The transformation back to diplomacy was visible, like watching a weapon return to its sheath. "Of course," he said, though his voice still carried an edge. "My apologies for the misunderstanding." But Yavari wasn't looking at him apologetically. She was looking at him with something that might have been curiosity, her head tilted slightly, as if encountering a puzzle she'd never seen before. "Lieutenant Torres," Rhys said without turning around, "secure that equipment properly." "Yes, sir." Torres scrambled to comply, his face flushed with embarrassment. As the formal introductions resumed, Rhys noticed Yavari continuing to observe him, not with the detached interest of a diplomat studying a foreign culture, but with something more personal, more intrigued. Later, as they were escorted to their quarters, Ambassador Caney shook his head. 30 seconds, Calder. You managed to stay diplomatic for exactly 30 seconds. Rhys glanced back toward the atrium, where Yavari still stood in conversation with her colleagues. She seemed to sense his gaze and turned, meeting his eyes across the distance. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a challenge. "Sometimes," Rhys said, still watching her, 30 seconds is enough. What he didn't see was the faint smile that touched Yavari's lips as she watched him disappear into the corridor. Among her people, such displays of protective instinct were considered primitive, unrefined. But she found herself wondering what it would be like to have someone willing to stand between her and danger with such immediate, unquestioning ferocity. The thought should have disturbed her. Instead, it lingered. Yavari found herself in the observation deck overlooking the training facilities more often than diplomatic protocol strictly required. She told herself it was research, understanding human behavioral patterns for her reports to the High Council. But she knew the truth was more complicated. Below, Captain Calder moved through combat forms with lethal precision. His human body, so different from Yavari physiology, seemed designed for violence in ways that should have repulsed her. Instead, she was fascinated by the controlled power in every movement, the way he channeled aggression into art. Studying the primitives again. Yavari didn't turn as Jorik, her aide, approached. His disapproval radiated from his silver-blue skin in subtle chromatic shifts that humans couldn't perceive. "They are our allies," she said mildly. "Understanding them benefits the alliance." "Understanding and obsessing are different things, Yavari. The Council has noticed your interest." Below, Rhys disarmed a training drone with vicious efficiency, his scarred hands moving like instruments of destruction. Sweat gleamed on his human skin, and when he paused to catch his breath, his chest rose and fell with an intensity that made something stir deep in Yavari's carefully controlled mind. That evening, the formal dinner proceeded with typical Yavari precision. The dining hall's acoustic dampeners ensured conversations remained at appropriate volumes, while the menu had been carefully selected to avoid any foods that might provoke excessive emotional responses in the human delegation. Yavari sat across from Captain Calder, noting how he held himself even during the meal, alert, ready as if expecting attack at any moment. The other humans seemed more relaxed, but Rhys remained coiled tension wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. "The territorial expansion of human colonies concerns us," High Counselor Thrain was saying, his voice carrying the modulated tones of Yavari authority. 17 new settlements in the past cycle. Such rapid growth seems aggressive. Ambassador Caney shifted uncomfortably. "The colonies are peaceful agricultural settlements, families seeking new homes. Families armed with military-grade weapons," Thrain observed. "Families that respond to the slightest provocation with violence." Yavari watched Rhys's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. His knuckles whitened where he gripped his dining implement. "Provocation?" Rhys's voice remained level, but something dangerous stirred beneath the surface. "Last month, raiders attacked the Kepler 438 colony, killed 16 civilians including children. The colonists defended themselves. An unfortunate incident," Thrain conceded, "but their response was excessive. Entire raider clans eliminated." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Rhys set down his utensil with careful precision, but Yavari could see the violence radiating from his human frame like heat from a forge. "Those raider clans murdered children," Rhys said, each word carved from ice. "They burned homes with families inside. And you call our response excessive?" "Captain," Ambassador Caney warned quietly. But Rhys was beyond diplomacy now. Yavari watched, transfixed, as the civilized veneer stripped away to reveal something primal and magnificent. "Let me explain something about humans," Rhys continued, rising from his seat. The movement was fluid, predatory. "We don't calculate acceptable losses when it comes to our families. We don't weigh cost-benefit ratios when children are screaming. We hunt down every last threat and eliminate it completely, because that's what love looks like when it has teeth." Silence stretched across the dining hall. Several Yavari had shifted away from the table, their skin paling with distress at such an emotional display. Thrain's expression remained neutral. "Such passion is exactly what concerns us, Captain." Later, Yavari found herself walking the gardens alone, trying to process what she'd witnessed. The bioluminescent plants pulsed gently around her, their rhythms designed to promote emotional equilibrium, but equilibrium felt suddenly inadequate. Regretting the dinner conversation, She turned to find Reese approaching through the artificial moonlight. He'd changed from his formal uniform into simple civilian clothes that somehow made him seem more dangerous, not less. "You could have ended the alliance tonight," she said. "Maybe." He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his human body. "Would that bother you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Yavari studied his face, angular planes and hard lines that spoke of a lifetime of conflict. So different from Yavari features which had been refined over millennia to express only harmony and peace. "You asked me something at dinner," she said finally, "about what love looks like when it has teeth. My people don't understand that concept." "No," Reese agreed. "You don't. Explain it to me." He was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the artificial stars scattered across the station's dome. "When I was 12, he said finally, "pirates attacked our transport, killed my parents, took the children as slaves. I watched my little sister die in the cargo hold because she was too small to work." His voice remained steady, but Yavari could see the old pain burning in his eyes. "The rescue ships found us 3 days later. I swore then that I'd never let anyone hurt what I loved again. And this drives your aggression? It drives everything." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Every battle I fight, every enemy I kill, every threat I eliminate, it's all her. It's all the people I couldn't save and the ones I still can." Yavari felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the garden's climate controls. "We're taught that such emotional attachment leads to chaos." "Maybe," Reese said, stepping closer. "But it also leads to this." His hand rose to touch her face, fingers tracing the silver-blue skin of her cheek with surprising gentleness. The contact sent electricity through her nervous system in ways Yavari physiology wasn't designed to process. "Why so aggressive?" she whispered, echoing the question that had haunted her thoughts. "Because we don't let anyone hurt what we love," he answered, just as he had at dinner. But now, looking into her dark eyes, the words carried a different weight entirely. And for the first time in her life, Yavari understood what it might mean to be worth fighting for. The council session had been brutal. 3 hours of circular arguments about trade routes and mining rights, with both sides dancing around the real issue, whether humans could be trusted with advanced Yavari technology. Reese had maintained diplomatic composure throughout, but Yavari could see the effort it cost him, the way his jaw tightened whenever Councillor Thrain made another veiled insult about human primitive instincts. When the session finally ended, she watched Reese storm from the chambers with barely controlled fury. She should have returned to her quarters to prepare her reports. Instead, she followed him. She found him in the biogardens, standing before the memorial grove, a section of Earth-native oak trees that the humans had requested as a reminder of home. His hands were braced against one of the massive trunks, his head bowed as if the weight of diplomacy had finally become too much to bear. "Captain?" He turned at her voice, and she was startled by the raw exhaustion in his features. "Yavari, I didn't expect—" "You shouldn't be alone," she said, moving closer. "Not after today." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Alone is what I do best. Keeps things simple. Does it?" She stopped just within arm's reach, close enough to see the tension radiating through his human frame. "You carry everyone's burden, but who carries yours?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He straightened, studying her face in the soft bioluminescence of the garden lights. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "Your people think I'm a barely civilized barbarian." "My people think emotion is weakness," she replied. "But watching you, I'm beginning to wonder if we're the ones who are weak." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that violated every principle of Yavari diplomatic protocol. Yavari felt her pulse accelerate, her skin flushing with chromatic shifts that would have scandalized her colleagues. Yavari. Her name on his lips was both warning and invitation. "This is dangerous territory." "I know." She stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his human body. "Show me what I'm missing." "You don't understand what you're asking. Then teach me." Something shifted in his expression, the last of his diplomatic restraint crumbling away. When he reached for her, his movements were achingly gentle despite the power in his scarred hands. His fingers traced the elegant curve of her neck, following the subtle ridges where silver met blue in her alien skin. "We're nothing alike," he murmured, but his touch contradicted his words, mapping her differences with reverent precision. "No," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. "We're not." When he kissed her, it was unlike anything in her experience. Yavari physical intimacy was restrained, controlled, a carefully modulated exchange of compatible energies. This was fire and hunger, a claiming that demanded everything she had to give. His lips moved against hers with desperate intensity, and she found herself responding with passions she'd never known she possessed. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, as heat pooled in parts of her anatomy that Yavari medical texts had described in only clinical terms. Against her body she could feel the evidence of his desire, hard and urgent and utterly human in its raw need. "Reese?" she gasped against his mouth, his name sounding foreign and exotic on her tongue. He lifted her easily, setting her on the stone bench beside the memorial oak. The position put them at eye level, and she was struck again by the intensity in his gaze, the way he looked at her as if she were something precious and dangerous all at once. "Last chance," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "After this, there's no going back." In answer, she pulled him down to her, claiming his mouth with newfound boldness. His groan of surrender vibrated through her chest, and suddenly his hands were everywhere, tangling in her hair, tracing the sensitive ridges along her spine, discovering places where human touch could drive Yavari physiology to heights of sensation her people had forgotten centuries ago. When he touched her intimately for the first time, she cried out in languages that predated both their civilizations. Her body arched against his, seeking more contact, more of the fire he carried within him. He was patient despite his obvious need, introducing her to pleasures that had nothing to do with Yavari concepts of controlled physical harmony, and everything to do with raw, desperate connection. "Beautiful," he whispered against her throat, his lips finding the pulse point that betrayed her arousal. So beautiful. She had never felt beautiful before. Elegant, perhaps. Refined. But beauty was something wild and untamed, something that burned rather than illuminated. Under his hands, she discovered she could be both, graceful and fierce, controlled and utterly abandoned. When they finally came together completely, it was with a gentleness that surprised them both. Despite his reputation for violence, despite the aggression that defined him in others' eyes, Reese moved within her like she was something sacred. Each thrust was measured, careful, designed to bring pleasure rather than conquest. But Valari found herself wanting more than his restraint. Her nails raked down his back, drawing gasps that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with the wild thing she was becoming in his arms. "Don't hold back," she whispered fiercely. "I'm not fragile." The words unleashed something in him, a passion that matched her own intensity. When he finally let himself love her without reservation, she understood at last what humans meant by fire. It consumed everything, demanded everything, and left nothing unchanged in its wake. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the artificial stars, her silver-blue skin a stark contrast against his human olive complexion. She traced the scars on his chest, evidence of battles fought and survived, while he combed his fingers through her hair with wonder. "My people will never understand this," she said quietly. "Mine won't either," he replied. "Fraternizing with aliens isn't exactly encouraged in the military. Are we making a mistake?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers stilling in her hair. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," he said finally. "This isn't one of them." She lifted her head to look at him, seeing something in his expression that made her chest tighten with emotions she had no name for. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, pulling her up for another kiss. "We figure out how to love each other across the stars." It should have been impossible. Their species, their cultures, their very concepts of emotion and attachment were fundamentally incompatible. But as she melted into his embrace once more, Yavari realized that some things transcended logic, transcended politics, transcended everything except the raw need to be close to another soul. For the first time in her life, she understood why humans fought so fiercely for what they loved. Because love like this, wild and consuming and absolutely terrifying, was worth any battle, any sacrifice, any risk, even if it meant crossing every line she'd ever been taught to respect. The emergency summons came at 0400 station time, jarring Yavari from the first peaceful sleep she'd experienced in years. Rhys had left her quarters only hours before, both of them reluctant to maintain the pretense of professional distance. Now, as she rushed through the corridors toward the High Council chambers, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. Inside the chamber, 7 of the most senior Yavari officials sat in judgment. Their collective disapproval was palpable, a chromatic display of silver-blue skin shifting toward darker hues that spoke of serious displeasure. Yavari of the 3rd diplomatic caste, High Counselor Thrain intoned, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You stand accused of compromising the integrity of this mission through inappropriate emotional attachment to the human liaison. Her blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow they knew about her and Rhys. I serve the Alliance faithfully, she said, maintaining the neutral tone expected of her caste. My conduct has been within acceptable parameters. Has it? Counselor Yith leaned forward, her ancient features expressing distaste. Surveillance recordings show you spending considerable time with the human captain. Time unaccounted for in your official reports. Yavari's mind raced. Surveillance in the gardens, the training facilities, possibly even. You had no right to monitor private spaces. We have every right, Thrain replied coldly. When the security of our species is at stake. The humans are a threat, Yavari. Their emotional instability, their tendency toward violence. These traits make them fundamentally incompatible with our goals. They're our allies. They are temporary partners at best. And your involvement with their military leader compromises your ability to assess that threat objectively. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle harmonic hum that permeated all Yavari architecture. Yavari felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on her, the expectation that she would submit, accept correction, return to the path of emotional neutrality that defined their civilization. Instead, she thought of Rhys's hands on her skin, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes when he spoke of the people he'd lost and the ones he'd saved. She thought of the passion that had awakened in her own body, emotions that made her feel more alive than any amount of Yavari serenity ever had. The humans fight for what they love, she said quietly. We've forgotten what that even means. Thrain's skin darkened further. Emotion leads to chaos, Yavari, to war, to the destruction of everything we've built. Does it? Or does it lead to the will to protect what matters most? Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in harsh red illumination as an automated voice announced, hostile vessels detected, all personnel to emergency stations. Through the chamber's viewport, Yavari could see explosions blooming like deadly flowers. In the vacuum beyond the station, 3 unmarked ships were attacking the docking bays where the human transport was moored. The Korthak Syndicate, Yith whispered, her composure finally cracking. They've found us. Yavari's blood went cold. The Korthak were pirates, slavers, the same breed of scum that had killed Rhys's family decades ago. If they took the station, we must surrender, Thrain declared. Offer tribute, negotiate, no. All eyes turned to Yavari as she stood, her voice carrying an authority she'd never used before. We fight. We are diplomats, Thrain protested. Not warriors. Then we get warriors. Yavari was already moving toward the chamber's communication console. Rhys will know what to do. The humans' violent methods will only escalate. Good. Yavari snapped, her composure finally shattering completely. Let them escalate. Let them see what happens when you threaten something humans love. She activated the emergency channel. Captain Calder, this is Yavari. We're under attack. Korthak raiders, 3 ships minimum. They're targeting the docking bays. Reese's voice came back immediately, already hard with battle readiness. Copy that. Get your people to secure areas and stay down. We'll handle the rest. Reese. She hesitated, aware that the entire High Council was listening. I love you. The words hung in the chamber like a declaration of war against everything her people represented. Thrain's expression was scandalized, while several other counselors made sounds of distress at such an emotional display. Reese's response was immediate and fierce. I love you too. Now get somewhere safe while I go kill some pirates. The next hour was chaos. Through the station's internal sensors, Yavari watched Reese coordinate the defense with ruthless efficiency. The human military personnel moved like a single deadly organism, turning the station's corridors into kill zones and the docking bays into graveyards. She watched Reese personally lead the charge against a boarding party that had breached the civilian quarters. His movements were poetry written in violence. Every shot precisely placed, every tactical decision calculated to maximize damage to the enemy while protecting the innocent. This was the aggression that so disturbed her people, but now she saw it for what it truly was. Love translated into action, emotion given teeth and claws and the will to use them. When it was over, 17 Korthak raiders were dead and their ships were drifting hulks in space. The station had taken damage, but no civilians had been harmed. 0 casualties among the defenders. Thrain stared at the tactical displays and something approaching. Awe. How is that possible? Because they fight for more than themselves, Yavari said quietly. Because they know what they're protecting. Hours later, as emergency repairs continued throughout the station, Yavari found Reese in the medical bay having shrapnel removed from his shoulder. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, but his eyes lit up when he saw her approach. How bad? She asked, settling beside the treatment table. Flesh wound, he said, wincing as the medical drone extracted another fragment. I've had worse. The council wants to see you, she said quietly. Thank you. Do they? There was something dark in his expression. Or do they want to discuss my excessive aggression again? She took his uninjured hand in both of hers. They're beginning to understand what you are, what you represent, and what's that? The strength we lost when we chose peace over passion. She met his eyes steadily. The fire we need if we're going to survive in a galaxy full of Korthak. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. What happens now? With us, I mean. Yavari thought of the High Council's disapproval, the centuries of tradition that opposed everything she felt for this human warrior. Then, she thought of the way he'd fought for her people, the way he'd protected innocent lives without hesitation or calculation. Now, she said, echoing his words from their first night together, we figure out how to love each other across the stars. Even if your people disapprove? She smiled, feeling the wild thing inside her stretching its wings. Especially then, because some things were worth fighting for, worth defying tradition and protocol and the comfortable numbness of emotional neutrality. Some things were worth the fire that came with truly caring about another soul. And if her people couldn't understand that, then perhaps it was time they learned what humans had always known, that love without the willingness to fight for it was just pretty words in the dark. 6 months later, Kepler 442b Colonial Authority. The new settlement stretched across the valley like a promise of what could be built when 2 species stopped seeing their differences as weaknesses. Human agricultural domes stood beside Yavari, crystal spires, while hybrid technologies powered systems that neither species could have developed alone. Yavari stood on the observation deck of the command center, watching construction crews work in perfect harmony below. Human engineers and Yavari technicians moved together with an efficiency that would have been impossible before the Korthak attack. That crisis had changed everything, forced both species to confront what they could accomplish when emotion and logic worked in concert rather than opposition. The council's decision came through, Reese said, joining her at the viewport. His formal dress uniform bore new insignia, Joint Operations Commander, a rank created specifically for the human Yavari alliance. They're approving the next phase of colonial expansion. 12 new worlds, Valari confirmed, not turning from the window. With mixed populations from the start, Thrain's faction fought it, but they can't argue with results. Reese moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders with familiar warmth. Hard to call humans dangerous when we keep saving Yavari lives. She leaned back against his chest, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. The Korthak attack was just the beginning. Intelligence reports suggest the hegemony is mobilizing for a larger offensive. Let them come. There was steel in his voice, but also something else, a calm confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was fighting for. We'll be ready. We, human, fire, Yavari precision. Emotion guided by logic, logic strengthened by passion. His arms encircled her waist. They won't know what hit them. A soft chime interrupted them. Incoming transmission from the orbital platforms. The holographic display activated, revealing Admiral Chen's weathered features. Commander Calder, Diplomat Valari. We've got incoming ships, unknown configuration. They're not responding to hails. Reese was already moving toward the command console. How many? 15 vessels, sir. Heavy cruiser class escorted by fighter squadrons, and sir, they're broadcasting hegemony identification codes. Valari felt ice form in her veins. The hegemony was the Korthak's parent organization, a loose confederation of pirate clans and slaver syndicates that had been growing bolder as the human Yavari alliance expanded. If they were moving openly. Time to intercept? Reese asked, his voice shifting into combat mode. 18 minutes at current velocity. Sound general alert. Civilian evacuation protocols are now in effect. Reese turned to Valari. I need you to coordinate with the Yavari defense platforms. Can you? I'm coming with you. Valari, this is going to be a straight fight. No diplomacy, no negotiation. They're here to destroy everything we've built. Then I'll help you stop them. She met his gaze steadily. I've learned a few things about fighting for what matters. The orbital battle was fierce but brief. The hegemony had expected to face either passive Yavari resistance or chaotic human aggression. Instead, they encountered something entirely new. A coordinated defense that combined human tactical brilliance with Yavari technological superiority. Valari found herself in the command center of the lead defense platform, directing Yavari crews with an authority that would have shocked her 6 months ago. She'd abandoned her diplomatic robes for combat armor, her hair bound back in a practical style that left her hands free to work the tactical displays. Incoming fighters, Vector 77 Mark IV, she called out, her voice carrying over. The bridges controlled chaos. Reese, can you intercept? Already on it, came his reply over the comm. She could hear weapons fire in the background as his squadron engaged the enemy. Nice work on those targeting solutions. Remind me to tell you how sexy you look in battle armor later. Despite the desperate situation, Valari found herself smiling. Only Reese would flirt in the middle of a firefight. The tide turned when the hegemony's flagship attempted to ram the primary defense platform. It was a desperate move, designed to cripple the Alliance's command structure even at the cost of their own vessel. What they didn't account for was Valari's response. All platforms, focus fire on the Dreadnought's engines, she commanded. Don't. Let them reach the command station. Valari, that's too risky. Reese's voice crackled through the comm. If they detonate their reactor, they won't. Her fingers flew over the controls, coordinating the most complex defensive maneuver in Yavari military history. Trust me. The combined firepower of 6 defense platforms converged on the hegemony flagship. Precisely targeted shots, calculated to disable rather than destroy, struck the massive vessel's propulsion systems. The ship lurched out of its ramming trajectory, spinning away from the platform in a controlled tumble that left it helpless but intact. Surrender now, Valari broadcast on all frequencies, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. And you will be treated according to the accords of civilized warfare. Continue to resist, and you will discover what happens when you threaten something humans love. The remaining hegemony ships surrendered within minutes. Later, as the last of the prisoners were transferred to detention facilities, Yavari stood in the wreckage of what had once been a peaceful command center. Smoke still drifted from damaged consoles and the deck was littered with debris from the battle. Rhys found her there, still in her combat armor, staring at the tactical display that showed the positions of captured enemy vessels. "You did it," he said quietly. "Coordinated the entire defense. Saved the colony." "We did it," she corrected. "Human fire, Yavari precision, just like you said." He moved to stand beside her, and she could see the exhaustion in his features. The battle had lasted only hours, but the stress of command, of protecting thousands of lives, had taken its toll on both of them. "The Council is going to have a lot of questions," she said. "About my conduct during the battle, about us." "Let them ask." His hand found hers, scarred fingers intertwining with elegant alien digits. "We've proven what we can accomplish together, what love can accomplish when it has the will to fight. And if they disapprove, then they can disapprove from the safety we've bought them." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm done hiding what I feel for you, Yavari. Done pretending this is just politics or strategy." She turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes the same wild certainty she felt in her own chest. "The High Council will never accept it. A human Yavari bond. Then we'll make our own council, our own rules." He gestured toward the viewport where human and Yavari ships were working together to secure the aftermath of the battle. "Look at them. Look at what we've built. This is bigger than politics or species prejudice. This is the future." As if to emphasize his point, a communication came through from the surface. Young voices, human and Yavari children playing together in the colonial shelters, asking when they could come out to see the pretty lights from the space battle. Children who had grown up seeing both species as family, who didn't understand why some adults thought their friendship was impossible. "Maybe you're right," Yavari said softly. "Maybe love is stronger than fear after all." "It has to be," Rhys replied, pulling her into his arms. "Because I'm not giving you up. Not for diplomacy, not for politics, not for anything." When he kissed her this time, it was with the desperation of someone who had almost lost everything and the fierce joy of someone who had chosen to fight for love instead of surrender to tradition. Around them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings who loved and fought and dreamed beneath their light. But for two souls who had found each other across the vast emptiness of space, who had chosen passion over protocol and fire over ice, the universe had become something beautiful and worth defending. Together, they would build something new among the stars, a civilization founded not on the suppression of emotion or the worship of violence, but on the simple truth that some things were worth fighting for. And love, they had learned, was the strongest thing of all. End.